8:40. Newstalk Sauga 960 Raw. Mike Richards here. Wow, November the 7th. And what does that normally mean? And I would say for the last, oh man, you could go back 40, 50 years. And when you talk about Canadian football, you would assume you know what I'm going to talk about. Canadian football, Mike. Well, so what about the Argos? What about the playoffs? What about the Ticats? What about the Calgary Stampeders? But here right now in 2022, Canadian football means something completely different, something that I never thought that I would ever say. And for Gianluca Nesci from theScore, that makes me sound crazy, Gianluca. It made me sound nuts. What do you mean you're not talking about? What are you going to be talking about? What we have someone who plays for Bayern Munich. 5 years ago, if I talked about Bayern Munich, people would say, what are you talking about? Oh, I'm talking about the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga? What are you, from Hogan's Heroes? What is that you're saying? It's another language, Gianluca. And so there we find ourselves here, not in the World Cup because we're hosting it, because they qualified. And that is a very, very different conversation. And by the way, this is Gianluca's debut on my show. We're thrilled to have you here. It's just awesome that you can join us here from theScore.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Now, in terms, and because this is the kind of show is we get to know people. We love to know their background. So you Toronto area, where are you from?
That's right. I'm in the West End, actually. Yeah, Toronto area. And so I've lived here all my life. Watched the Canadian national team all my life. And I think something that's not uncommon for soccer fans or football fans in this country. You find a different national team on the men's side to support because the Canadian national team has just been not non-existent, but they've just been a non-factor for so long, right? So my parents are Italian, so naturally I kind of wanted to watch the Italian national team and gravitated towards that team. And look where we are now. Italy not in the World Cup and Canada's there. So there you go.
Yeah, who would have saw that coming? Now, do you have a team necessarily in Serie A? Do you have an affinity for a certain team? Who is it? We need to know.
I do. I'm a Juventus supporter, and I don't want your listeners to get too upset.
I was going to say
nobody's perfect. I know.
People, Fiorentina guys are throwing stuff at the radio right now. They're very upset. But great to have you on there. And I said, the thing is, 10 years ago, maybe not even 5 years ago, saying Juventus may just have been something that floats over people's heads, and they're maybe vaguely familiar with it, but they really wouldn't know. We've become a different culturally a different country when it comes to football, and the fact that the best team I think we've had, even in terms of just international team sports, probably was the women's national team, to be honest, if we're being candid here. But the fact that the men with John Herdman and with this collection of players who are playing at such a high level in some of these leagues around the world that are massive, that we have now found ourselves asking questions about, group stages, and people asking about knockout stages. And so before we get carried away with that, I mean, I understand CONCACAF was incredible and the Azteca quote unquote game was amazing. But if we're being realistic about this, Gianluca, with this team, because you also host a new podcast called Canucks in Qatar, which is a very cool idea. What kinds of things are you talking about when it comes to the Canadian men's national team?
Yeah, I think, our first episode, which launched today, looks back at that qualifying run that you mentioned. So many sort of indelible moments now in Canadian soccer history, right? The Azteca you mentioned, the win over Mexico, going to Honduras and vanquishing some of those long-standing demons in San Pedro Sula. So looking back a little bit on the history, how we got to this point, and then looking forward, as you said, going into Group F, into Qatar, they're not just there just to make up the numbers. I think, in talking to some of these players in the lead up, it's not a situation where they're just happy to be there, right? I think they are very quietly confident, I would say, that they actually have a chance to make some noise. Extremely difficult group, obviously Belgium and Croatia, finalists from 4 years ago. Even Morocco, I think a lot of people are sleeping on, a lot of talented players there. So it's going to be very difficult, but I don't think it's overly ambitious to think that they have a chance to get into second place in that group. I think maybe first place might be a little bit of a stretch, perhaps, but you never know. Belgium are sort of at the tail end of their golden generation, some older players that I think Canada can actually take advantage of with the makeup of their team. So again, I think there's a chance. It's going to come down, in my opinion, to that game against Croatia. Can they nick a point there? Can they beat Morocco? And then if you get into the knockout stage in a one-off, all bets are off.
Well, I think people also have to realize, even scoring goals, like scoring a goal is going to be of significance in these kinds of games. And the fact is, for people who, and non-footy people who aren't really quite familiar with international football, to understand that literally every member of that Moroccan team plays somewhere in Europe. They're playing, whether it's in Holland or Germany, England, you name it. They're playing. Turkey. I mean, they're playing in big leagues. So therefore, I mean, they do extremely well in the African Cup of Nations. They are a significant team. And sometimes if you're not versed in this, like a lot of Canadians are talking about, the quarterfinals or semifinals. I'm like, well, you had to get by, a team. See, in that group, Croatia to me, Gianluca, is very, very tough. Belgium has huge names. So you got De Bruyne and Lukaku and see, but guys like Hazard and so on, these guys are in the twilight of their career. They're a little bit older. In fact, if you talk to a Belgian person, they're not that high on this team. They're kind of reserved a little bit, and they've been so close for so many years, but they don't think this is the year. Of course, if you talk, half our audience is Croatian. I call them the Croatian mafia. So of course they're licking their lips already. But when you look at the status of that team, Croatia is a tough team to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, well, you look at the midfield in particular with Luka Modric as the headliner. It's a big task for, I think, Stefan Eustáquio in particular, who's playing great right now with Porto. Back-to-back Champions League games with a goal for him. He's really kind of risen with the national team and replicated that at club level. So he's got to go up against De Bruyne in that first game and then Modric in the second one. It's going to be tough. And it's a veteran team, Croatia, like I said before, finalists from 4 years ago. They're bringing a lot of those pieces back, headlined by Modric. Even Perisic is still there. But they also have some young guys coming through. Josko Gvardiol, who plays for RB Leipzig, super versatile defender. So they're going to be very, very tough. I think there are some spots where Canada can exploit them on the wings in particular, which we saw, throughout the qualifying campaign with guys like Davies, of course, who, thank God we dodged a big bullet there with the
yes.
the
And
injury.
and Gianluca, that point's not lost on anybody following this thing, because for Bayern, it was a hamstring issue and there was a slight tear. So anyone who has been cheering for this national team went into the fetal position, but I think they kind of dodged a bullet. Did they not?
I think so. I mean, what Bayern are saying is that he's not going to play for them in the next couple of weeks again. So they said that his World Cup participation is not in doubt, not at risk, quote unquote. So good news for Canada. Certainly, it's a little concerning, obviously, that he's going into the tournament on the back of an injury. Is he going to be available for that first game on the 23rd? It's going to be in a heartbeat here pretty soon. So it's still a torn muscle, a torn hamstring muscle. So it might be tough to get him at 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a dream situation, obviously you have him at 100% for every game, but can they get him back fully fit for Croatia? Because as you said earlier, I mean, that's the game. If you want to advance, that's the one you have to have.
We're in conversation with Gianluca Nesci. He is the supervising editor of theScore. And once again, the podcast, which kicked off, I believe today, Canucks in Qatar. And so you're going to get all kinds of information. You go to that podcast and really background information for those who, again, kind of excited about our men being in a World Cup, because there's a lot of moving pieces when you're not maybe necessarily a footy first person. So sometimes, for instance, Gianluca, people will look at these numbers and say, what do they mean, their formation? What are they talking about? What does that mean? Well, I think if you're looking at what Canada wants to do, and we can talk a little X and O at this point, when you have guys on the wing like Davies and so on, whose speed it causes a lot of problems. And there are countries who by reputation play a certain way. Mexico's a very fast team, because they kind of have to be, because they're not as big as everybody else. When they get into the box, the big teams, like the Brazilians, they always have length. They're tough to muscle out. They've got to play a certain way. And so I look at what Canada needs to do to be successful. Are we saying it's playing with pace, that they want to get those guys into space? What is Canada's advantage, if there is some? What is it? What are we looking for Canada to be successful?
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head here. They have to get out into space with guys like Davies, Tajon Buchanan for sure. And try and set up as much as possible Jonathan David, who's having a spectacular season in France right now, one of the leading goal scorers in France. Can they find ways to get Davies and Buchanan and some of their other guys in one-on-one situations out wide? And I think the thing you look at that was most exciting for me watching Canada throughout qualifying is that they're just a fun team to watch, formations and tactics aside, even because they're very fluid. They can play different ways. They like to play with 3 defenders at the back, 3 center backs, and then use a pair of wing backs, get them out into space out wide. But they're malleable, they're fluid, and they can play in different ways, and they can beat you in different ways, which is exciting and maybe a first for this national team in a long time. So I think you're going to see that. It's not necessarily going to be one style. I think Herdman and his staff are very good at tailoring a game plan to their specific opponent. We talked about Belgium before, some aging defenders there, certainly. That's an area where you can take advantage of it with your pace out wide. And then against Croatia, can you dominate the midfield? So it's going to be different in different games, but they're going to be aggressive. They're going to try and press high. I think we saw in that warm-up game against Uruguay, they tried to play out from the back. They're not going to be afraid when other teams attack them and try to be aggressive. They're not going to be overawed in any way, which is really exciting. And they're going to try and press and be on the front foot. And can they cause some turnovers deep in the final third and then get their skilled players in some advantageous spots? So that's the thing I think certainly that I'm going to be looking out for as they're in Qatar.
John, look, it's a good point because, there would be years, and certainly we go back to the 80s, where the stage was pretty big for those Canadians. I mean, we qualify. We're out in Newfoundland, and people were in lawn chairs or whatever it was. I mean, this was very different. Where now our guys playing stadiums. They play in stadiums. Whether it's Switzerland or Austria. I mean, you mentioned FC Porto. I mean, these are big state. The moment isn't too big for them. And then when you have out in Edmonton, 60,000 people, they're comfortable in their own skin, right? That's a huge thing because look, the reality is, Inglaterra isn't exactly what they used to be. In fact, there are times where I've looked at their program and thought they were terrible. They've taken some bad losses. Even France, big names, Mbappe, and you go through they have not looked great. In fact, if I'm looking at this World Cup, and of course Brazil's going to be very, very strong. They usually are. Don't you feel, Gianluca, this might be a little more wide open than years gone by, where even Germany isn't untouchable? I mean, I'm using this word, the Tedeschi, which normally come out, they're big and blonde and be huge, guys you can't move out. But the Germans themselves are a little unsure where this is going to fall. I think this might be one of the more wide open World Cups, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think parity is the word right now in international football for sure, especially with the European teams, the teams that you just mentioned. France feels like they could implode at any moment. They're always good for a big World Cup implosion, kind of peppered in between their title wins. So they could be due for one of those. A lot of injuries, a lot of infighting. So just a lot of drama there right now. England, you talked about, they're massively injured at the moment in a variety of different areas, especially at fullback, which is a big problem for them with the way they want to play. And there's a lot of questions about Gareth Southgate. This could be his last tournament. People calling for his head. So drama there as well. Spain don't really have a proven goal scorer right now, number 9. Alvaro Morata, someone I'm familiar with from my Juve fandom. Also injured right now, but he's just not that bona fide big name striker who you can rely on, I think, in some of the biggest moments to give you the goals. Germany a little bit in transition with Hansi Flick and what they're trying to do, and they just seem, I don't know, not disinterested, but they can't put it together for 90 minutes in a big game right now. They go through moments, they go through ups and downs, and then Belgium, we talked about before, never really able to kind of deliver on the big stage with this golden generation they're in. So with those issues with the European teams, I go back to the 2 South American kind of powerhouses, and you said Brazil and Argentina as well. I think Brazil are the most well-balanced team in the tournament, and they have Neymar kind of leading the way. So they have the star power, as always, and the flair that they always have. And then you come to associate with Brazilian teams over the years. But I really like Argentina, the look of Argentina going in 35 games unbeaten over 3 years, and some really big results in that time. And of course, you have the possible kind of storybook ending for Leo Messi in his final World Cup. And I think that not only is it big for him, but everybody around him in that team trying to pull in the same direction to do it for him. This is certainly the most comfortable he's ever looked playing for the national team. I think he's finally happy playing for the national team, which is an important factor as well. And yeah, Argentina, I think Argentina is going to be very, very tough to beat.
So what you're telling us, Fratello, is that we should be betting heavy, large on Argentina. So you're taking out the children's education fund when Nona's not looking. You're taking a little here, there, a little there. Is that what you're telling us?
The $20 bills that Nona slips to you before you leave. Yeah, that's you're putting that on Argentina.
Well, hey, you did a great job here this morning. I look forward to doing this more often. If you're available, love to have you on. That was just, it was fantastic. What a great debut.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'd absolutely love to do this more going forward.
And a reminder, so if they want to get Canucks in Qatar, how are they getting this how are they doing this?
Yeah, so that's available, like you said, launched today on all the standard podcast platforms. So you can check it out wherever you are listening to your podcast, and also directly through the theScore app. We've got it there as well. And yeah, we're really excited for listeners to kind of join along on the ride here with us, and what is hopefully a long ride for Canada this winter.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Ci vediamo. Ciao bello. Great job. Amazing.
Thank you very much for having me.
Gianluca, there he is right there. Gianluca Nesci is the supervising editor for theScore. And of course, as he said, the host of the new Canucks in Qatar. Great job here this morning. He'll be keeping us up to date on what's going on as people around the country, coast to coast, are in the fetal position, afraid of what's coming. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. They're going to come through. Trust me.